Hey, real life groups. This is the real life group message recap. This week we talked about the church in Pergamum and how they had stayed faithful in the midst of persecution and all of that, but Jesus still had something against them. They'd adopted the doctrine of the Nicolaitans and of Balaam, and we talked about what all that was. Basically, to sum it up, idolatry and immorality. And we were wrestling with this question. The reason why idolatry and immorality have a place in our heart at all, and even temptation, is because somewhere down deep in our heart, we don't really believe that God's ways are best. And so we talked about needing to repent because Jesus said to repent. And we've talked about that the last couple weeks, so we don't want to rehash that. But we do need to repent of the things that we've done, but I want to take a little different approach and not just talk about repenting of what we've done, but also repenting of the things that we've left undone. Because the reality is that if we have a vacuum of things that, in our life, of things that we create a space for, that Satan's going to fill it with something. And we can focus all we want all day long on not doing bad things, not doing wrong things. But if we don't fill our heart with right things and good things, then all we're doing is we're dealing with the symptoms, which would be idolatry and immorality, rather than the root, which is things in our heart. And so we talked about feeding the Spirit. As the more we feed the Spirit, we're going to think about things of life rather than feeding the flesh. Because if all we do is feed the flesh, we're going to feed death and sin. And all of that is going to be a part of our thoughts. But we also talked about basically one of the ways we remind ourselves of God and His ways being best is repenting, yes, but also repeating only what God says. Remember, Balaam, he was going to curse the children of Israel, and as he opened his mouth, all that could come out was blessing. All that he could say is what God said. And so we talked about using our inside voice. We have that inner conversation. Every single one of us has this inner conversation running in our heart. And we sometimes think like it doesn't really count. Like the inside voice doesn't really count, the way we talk about other people inside our heart, the way we talk about our fear or our doubt or even our relationship with God. We sometimes have separated the two. But no, what's happening on the inside is really the truest indicator of what we really believe. In fact, it's basically our prayer life because God sees it all anyway. And so some of us, we need to preach to ourselves on the inside. We need to use our inner voice to be able to rehearse and repeat what God says about other people and about our situation. And then, not just the meditations of our heart, but the words of our mouth to be able to speak and use our outside voice, because what's in us is going to come out of us. Because if we could change what happens on the inside of our heart, we change what comes out of our life. And so the questions for us is, are there things we need to repent of? Maybe some things that we've left undone. And if you feel comfortable sharing some of those things that you know are undone, you might share those with other people and encourage them to repent of things that are undone in their life. Or motivation. Maybe there's a motivation in your heart where you always seem to drift to focus on the negative and trying not to sin rather than drifting onto the positive and speaking the spirit of life over your life. Are there areas of your life where the conversation on the inside tends to be wrong and doesn't repeat what God says in your inner voice? What's that like? What's your inner voice like? What's your outer voice like? So those are some thoughts to think about as we're looking at the message this week, the church to Pergamum. A lot of good things there. Repent and repeat what God says.